Here's what's beautiful. We know the system is going to change. We know that because the financial system is collapsing now. You do not have five banks collapse and that's it. Okay, that's just the start of the avalanche. Avalanches start with a single snowflake.
Let's do chat about some sadly more grim topics like the economy. I would normally start my interviews with an obligatory 40,000-foot view question. And you were a pilot, so that's kind of fitting in this case. If we were to get on one of your planes, I mean, and not fly under the Eiffel Tower, but just look at the state of geopolitics and macroeconomics through your lens, what would we see?
Actually, you would get a nosebleed.
How come?
This is the most dangerous flight slash economy that I've ever seen. It absolutely terrifies me. Not that things are happening, because these are all things that I've been predicting for years, but the fact that it's happening so quickly. To give you an idea, let me grab a piece of paper here and read this. First Republic was $16 a share a week ago today. Friday, it closed at $2.83. I think it's zero now. JP Morgan has bought the remains of First Republic from the FDIC. I don't even know what I don't know if the shareholders got anything. So guy said $16 a share stock a week ago and have zero now. And January 1st, First Republic was $147.68, and it's zero today, 4 months later. The scary thing is that all banks in the world are in exactly the same boat, and the boat is sinking. So from 40,000 feet, you're going to get a nosebleed.
But what do you mean the boats? I mean, if I look at the JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citi, they're all making money. Profits are rising. JP Morgan's making another, I mean, in my eyes, a good deal here. So it seems like the big banks, the banks that the economy relies the most on are okay.
Well, they are for now. Okay, here's the deal. It's very important to understand because you're in Europe. The negative interest bearing European bonds last year went down 46%. Now, in theory, and actually the EU required a lot of banks and insurance companies and hedge funds to own these. When you have a 46% decline in what should be your safest asset, you're in deep, serious trouble. Now, all of the five banks that have gone under in the last, I think it's month or 6 weeks, had exactly the same problem. When the interest rates went up, the value of their bonds plummeted. So we're not even talking about bad loans. We're talking about bad investments. In 1931, a Rothschild Bank in Austria, the largest bank in Austria, was the Credit Anstalt. And in May of 1931, it collapsed. And banks hold assets of loans, obviously, and bonds, government bonds, and bonds of other banks. Now, when all three of those are declining, they're in trouble. But the key is everybody's in the same boat. So if the front end of the boat sinks, eventually the back end of the boat's going to sink too. In 1931, it took from 1931 until March of 1933 for the United States banking system to collapse. And the banking system took 100% of the investment of 25% of Americans lost 100% of what they had in the bank. What the Federal Reserve has done with JP Morgan today is actually a really good move. They haven't stopped the leak, but they have stuck their thumb in it so it's not leaking quite as fast. JP Morgan, if it survives, will have done absolutely the deal of the century. But the investors in First Republic have lost about $30 billion. That's the shareholders. The bondholders will have been wiped out as well. So we're still talking about a couple of $100 billion just disappeared and went to money heaven.
But you say if JP Morgan survives, that's an interesting note here, because if all the metrics that I know to look at when it comes down to a bank, and mind you, I'm not a bank analyst, I'm not an analyst of any sorts, but so all the metrics that I know to look at look fine to me. I mean, it doesn't seem a question of if JP Morgan is going to survive.
Jim Cramer was recommending First Republic 2 weeks ago. Okay, First Republic went from $16 to $0 in a week. All banks are in exactly the same boat. Okay, so maybe JP Morgan will survive, but we've got a financial system that is clearly broken. There's $300 trillion in debt. Nobody I know actually believes that it's going to be paid. And the real question is, who's going to absorb the loss? And nobody wants to absorb the loss. The investors in the bank don't want to absorb the loss. The people who have deposited in the bank don't want to take the loss. The bondholders don't want to take a loss. The government doesn't want to take a loss. Nobody wants to take a loss. But the key is all loans get paid. They get paid either by the borrower or they get paid by the lender. In the Western-based financial system, this goes back to Greek and Roman times, the creditors had all the power. And the debtors literally ended up losing their land, losing their jobs, and losing their families. Okay, they were put in bondage. I think that's a bad system. And I'm actually working on a book right now talking about using a jubilee as a way of solving the problem. You cannot have 0.1% of people controlling all the assets. And that's what the World Economic Forum wants to do. And the 99.9% of people, the useless eaters, will literally be slaves. If you're in debt, you are a slave. And I think I'm 76, and people used to understand how dangerous debt was before, and I don't think anybody understands it today. Debt is slavery, and you're giving control of your life to other people. The average interest rate paid in the United States on credit card debt is over 24%, which means your credit card debt doubles every 3 years. Now, that's a staggering number. When you're paying 24%, you're a hostage. When Rome collapsed, and it collapsed because of its debt situation, identical to what we have today, we had 1,000 years that we called the Dark Ages. The financial system today is far more dangerous than it was in say, 400 AD, because it's worldwide. And I believe, it's just my opinion, we're not going to know for a year or two. I believe that the Russians and the Chinese understand what the World Economic Forum is trying to do, and they're going to come up with an alternative financial system that is not debt-based, and it doesn't turn people into slaves. I hope that happens, okay? In this situation, I'm not picking sides on a political basis. I'm picking sides on a financial basis. the American Western debt-based system is bankrupt. It's collapsing. The United States is collapsing now. Europe is an utter disaster. The war in Ukraine has gotten to the point where it's really criminal. It's an absolute massacre of these troops, and there was no reason for that to happen whatsoever. And the people behind it, which is the neocons in the United States, want Ukraine to keep fighting to the last man. And I'll be blunt, I think that's absolutely criminal. They have lost hundreds of thousands of young men.
It seems to me, though, that although the situation might look grim in when you talk about it that way, is that the depth of the U.S. financial markets, the transparency that there is in the corporate world in the U.S. and in Europe too, is nothing like what we've had before. I mean, the just I don't even know, like the size of the sheer size of the thing is just, it almost seems too big, too deep, and too developed to fail in the way that you're describing, at least from a surface look.
From a superficial view, that may be true, but the system is rotten. The banking system is rotten. The financial system overall is rotten. The medical system is absolutely disgusting. The whole COVID thing was total fraud. And I think we're at peak insanity. I think things going on are just simply insane. The Swiss central bank, I think, has 5 times more assets and liabilities than the entire GDP of Switzerland. Do you understand that you can't have an economy based on shuffling pieces of paper?
I don't know what that means necessarily, but it seems like we have been having an economy built on those pieces of paper for quite a while now.
Well, we have, and I can't guarantee these numbers are true because I haven't looked them up lately. I think 32% of the U.S. economy is financial services, and I think 12% is manufacturing. Mining, which used to be a big industry in the United States, is half of 1%. Somebody has to produce something at a profit. Playing Monopoly, okay, even when the bank has an unlimited supply of $100 bills, playing Monopoly is not an economy. You cannot have an economy based on an Indian casino and a hairdressing salon. That's not an economy, and certainly the Chinese understand it, and it certainly appears that the Russians understand it, because 15 months ago, the United States and the EU put all these sanctions on Russia, and they believed it would bring Russia to their knees, and it did exactly the opposite. It forced Russia to come up with an alternative financial system, and they have. And the Russians have done very well financially, and they were supposed to be bankrupt. Now, the West simply does not understand BRICS, doesn't understand what they're about, doesn't understand what their objectives are. And the BRICS are struggling. I don't know what the new financial system is going to look like. Nobody does. However, I know that the Western system is bankrupt and corrupt to the point it has to be replaced.
I'm seeing some arguments against that, I guess, as of recently. There's even a very nice thread on Twitter, somebody talking about the geography of the US and all the benefits that geography brings with it, on top of having what I previously mentioned, a transparent corporate world, regulations, rule of law, stuff like that, deep financial markets, the reserve currency, and stuff like that.
Are we talking about the United States?
Yeah.
Okay, who picked the president in 2020?
I don't
Who
know.
determined who the president was going to be in the election?
I don't know. From what I can see, the people.
Bullshit.
I don't know.
The FBI and the CIA picked the president. A month before the election, the FBI took control of Hunter Biden's laptop, and it's clear on Hunter Biden's laptop that the big guy was taking bribes from China, Russia, and Ukraine all at the same time. The United States is more corrupt today than it has been in U.S. history, period. We no longer have free elections. We no longer have fair elections.
Absolutely understand that. And the general media is absolutely not to be trusted. The point is that alternative media is also not just blindly to be trusted either. And what I'm trying to figure out here is that previously when empires would collapse, we would have new takers of the throne, if you will. But who are you going to trust more? I mean, I understand the point that, okay, elections might have been set or whatever it might be, that it's not completely transparent, but it's sort of the cleanest shirt in the laundry basket. Like, who's going to take the throne? I mean, who do you trust more? China? Do you want to depend on the Indian financial system? So that's what I'm thinking about. If the US collapses, who's taking the throne? And if we don't have a taker, is it really going to collapse?
Let me ask you another question. What are the two countries that have the highest GDP in the world for 18 of the last 20 centuries?
I don't know.
China and India.
Okay.
So for China to be at the top of the heap is not something new. It's not something unusual. It's actually the way it was 90% of the last 2,000 years. So if they come up with a system that doesn't have the fatal flaws of the debt-based system, and I argue absolutely the debt-based system does not work. It puts people into slavery. It transfers all of the power, political and military and economic, to the 1/10 of 1%, and that's not a good thing. Here's what's beautiful. We know the system is going to change. We know that because the financial system is collapsing now. You do not have 5 banks collapse, and that's it. Okay, that's just the start of the avalanche. Avalanches start with a single snowflake. When you're a quarter of the way down the mountain, you look at it and say, well, it looks like it's okay from here. But it's an avalanche, and it's going to keep going until it hits bottom. We have to cure the problem of the $300 trillion in debt. And the cure is not to go further into debt. And strange enough, everything that the United States is doing, and I think that's true, Europe too, everything they're doing is contrary to that. The negative interest rate bonds are the dumbest thing that I've ever heard. I don't know how anyone could argue that made sense. And I took economics in 1971, 1972, and 1973. If I had walked into class and said, someday Europe's going to go to negative interest rates, the instructor would have flunked me out of the course.
It sounds like it's inevitable, but therefore not necessarily imminent, right? So how do I, as a speculator who's trying to build capital in this situation, how do I know that I should be preparing for that instead of still trying to make money? Because it's been inevitable for the last 10, 20 years, whatever. But it's not being imminent. And we went through crisis. We went through 2008. Europe went through 2011, 12, 13, the banking crisis. A bunch of regulations came out of that. And people who stayed invested over that period of time, they still came off much better than the people who were preparing for the crash. You know that old saying that more money has been lost preparing for the crash than during the actual crash, or I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it comes down to. So yeah, how do I know it's imminent?
Yeah, that's true. but actually, I believe it is imminent. I have said for the last month or two that there will be more change in the next 6 months than there has been in the last 50 years. And you know who actually agrees with me?
Who?
The head of China and Putin.
Mm.
Okay, when they had their meeting in Moscow, and Putin was driving the Chinese prime minister to the airport, he said, "Do you realize we're going to totally change the system?" And Putin said, "Yeah, I understand that." And strange enough, they are saying exactly what I said. Things are happening so fast. All of the internals of the market that I see, and that's interest rates changes, that's the price of gold, it's the price of commodities. Germany just shut down their last 3 nuclear power stations. And while there are certainly problems with nuclear power, the company that owned the power stations that shut down increased their prices 45% that day. In France, I'm paying 150% more this year than I did last year for energy. We're in it. It's not the crash. It's not coming. It's here. That's another good point. Okay. In a financial chaos, in a collapse, everybody's going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. The solution is get hurt the least amount possible. So you not only want to watch over your eggs, you want to have 2 or 3 baskets, okay? Because some of your investments are going to get wiped out. Some of them are going to disappear. And it could be something as simple as putting $10,000 into a bank account that you know is insured, because the fact of the matter is the FDIC cannot possibly cover the, let me see how much it is. It's 17 or 18 trillion dollars that is insured with 125 billion. I think 1.2% of the money at risk is in the insurance. So that means that there's $1.20 in insurance for every $100 in deposits. So a lot of people who think they have safe investments under 250,000 are going to wake up one day and they're going to be handed shares in the bank and say your money went to money heaven.
All right, that's going to have to be it for the first part of the conversation that I had with Bob Moriarty. Well, it's not necessarily the first part. Like, I'm not going to split this into first and second part. I just tried to clip out the most significant moments of that conversation in a more, I guess, easily digestible set of points, if you will, that Bob made throughout that whole conversation. But we spoke for over an hour or so, so he made many different points. He gave me his opinion on some geopolitical issues, you know, ranging from the war in Afghanistan. What is that now, actually, like 20 years ago or something like that, all the way through what is happening right now, what's going on right now in Europe, and how all that ties in together into the challenge that the US dollar hegemony is allegedly experiencing right now. So he made some other good points too. He talked some small talks, interesting stuff about his background. If you want to find out, if you care about those things, you can find that conversation on resourcetalks.com under the tab interviews, where you can also talk to other people. So it is a chat platform where you can chat to other people. You don't need a login, nothing. You can just go on there, talk to other people, find that interview under the tab interviews, but you can also get access to full and unedited conversations in advance prior to posting them on here on YouTube. And if you're on Discord, by the way, that's what we use to host resourcetalks.com. You can also find an invite to the Discord server right at the top corner of that page. And if you don't care about any of that, then I guess I'm sorry for wasting your time, and I am going to be shutting up now. Thanks for watching.